And actually, here's a funny little story. My first book was a poetry anthology I edited with a professor. She's in it. This was published in 2000, I think. Your poem, Underwater? Yeah. So I got to write a love note to her and all sorts of other people and say, I love your work, will you please give me something? Which is a great thing to do with anthologies in general. So I've known about her professionally for decades. We also both have the connection of having got our PhDs from Florida State University, but we missed by about 2 years or so. So I really never hung out with her ever. I've seen her at conferences before and kind of done the wave thing. So this is a real treat tonight to get the inside story about all of her successes and all the things that she's done. And so we're actually going to dive right into the Q&A. And about halfway through, I'm going to turn it over to y'all, and then I will take your questions. And that's what we're going to do for the next hour. Okay? So we're going to get into some of the biography here so we all know a little bit more about you. Could you talk a little bit about on how you came to know you were going to be a writer, and then how you transitioned from that into studying it formally at college?
Duh. It's like a really difficult question, but I'll try. I always knew. Did you always know you were going to make stories? I always knew. I never didn't know. It's like the water I was always swimming in. I was wired for it, and then to study it formally, I didn't know that was a thing. I thought you had to get a job. So when I found out you could major in writing and major in story, I was already doing it. I was already signed up.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about your experience at Florida State University. You spent a lot of time there. You went there, got your undergraduate and your master's and your PhD there. What was that like, and what were some of the most important lessons that you learned while you were there?
So I don't know if you know, but I have a weird neurological disorder that prevents me from being able to recognize my fellow humans by their face. So I will never see you again. I'll never recognize you. I've walked past my husband, my children, my mother. I can't recognize people, which turns out to be a fantastic disability if you want to be an artist, because parties aren't really an option. Watching TV is really difficult unless you have a super patient friend. So I just got a lot of work done. I got my work done. And staying in one place, Tallahassee, there's nothing to do at all. So I just got my work done.
Talk about how you got from there to Hope College, where you spent 18 years, right, teaching up there. How did that happen, and what was that like working in Michigan?
The witness protection program is what that was like. I didn't know about the disability for a long time. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. So it was really hard to date, because you'd see the person the next day and walk right past them. They're pissed off. You don't know why. It was incredibly difficult. So my first job was in San Antonio. I had a great professor gig, but I just couldn't really function not knowing what this issue was. So I thought, I'll move to a small town in the Midwest, a Dutch town. It turns out everybody in Holland, Michigan looks the same. So it was even more difficult. But by process of elimination, I made friends and found a husband and made a really good career there. Again, small, snowy town, nothing to do, no distractions, no parties. I wrote 8 books.
That's amazing. Talk to me about how you transitioned into writing craft books, how-to books on writing, because you wrote a couple, and one of them's done really, really well. It's in its 4th edition now, is that right?
It's very unusual for a book to be in its 4th edition. So this is my cash cow, I guess, the practice of creative writing. So I always was a good teacher. Like, I understood how to teach writing. Like, I could figure out what they don't know. And I thought I would just type up my lesson plans and start making money. It doesn't work that way at all. It was really, really, really hard to do, because I think it might be like game design. I don't really know anything about game design, but you've got to have a story and a structure that's going to take the viewer, the whatever you call it, a player. They have to go through it, and you can't let them leave. So it was a great design exercise. I learned so much, and the way I set it up was the way I teach. Was I don't really care about genre. Genre and gender share a word root. They're just made up categories. I don't believe in them. So I made a list of everything I love in literature. And then I made a list, and I hope this doesn't sound judgy, Ryan, but I made a list of everything that just sucked in my work and my beginning writing, just what's terrible about it. And so I came up with this approach where let's just teach what works. It doesn't really matter what genre it is. It should have energy. There should be some kind of conflict in it. Art always has a pattern to it, even if it's chaos. There's just these things, these principles. So I set it up that way, and then you just do whatever genre or make one up. That was the plan. And it took off.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've used the book myself as well. So
Thank you.
One of the things that you've done is that you have done a lot of work in a lot of different areas. Like, people might think of you as a poet because you've done a lot in that area, but you've also done essays and you've got short story collection. What do you think of yourself as in terms of your identity as a writer? Like, are you a poet who does essays, or do you not even think about it in those ways?
I don't think about it in those ways. I really resist categories and binaries and label. It's just, I don't even know if I call myself a writer. I make things. I'm a teacher, and I write and live my life. I don't know why writer sounds pretentious to me, but it does sometimes.
Not to this group, right? No, not to us. We're a special group here.
It's a very special group.
Talk a little bit about your writing process. Like what do you do? Like, give us the inside story of how Heather Sellers writes.
I wonder if it's like yours, Ryan. I mean, I'm a daily writer. I think if you're in the arts, it's a daily practice. That quote, I'm sure you've heard all these quotes. You got to stay on speaking terms with your instrument. You can't really miss a day, or it takes 3 days to get back to it. So I just have to practice every day. It's weird after 12 books that you lose your skills, but I guess I'm not sticky. I just can't do it if I stop doing it. So it's a practice. So I go to the desk in the morning. I can't brush my teeth or put on clothing. I have to stay as close to the dream state as possible. And then my exercise is to try to do something that I can't do yet on the page. So I have to have something to solve. No journaling, no talking, just trying to execute craft techniques. What's your process?
It's a little bit similar to that. I want to add, though, that Robert Owen Butler, who we had in here many years ago, the Pulitzer Prize winner, he was here about 5 years ago. He's got a really good craft book called From Where You Dream, The Art of Yearning. It's a how-to writing thing. And he talks about this endlessly. He's so convinced it all happens in the dream state that he believes you should do exactly what you just said. Like, you get up, run. Like, don't go to the bathroom, don't talk to your spouse, pet your dog, don't eat your, whatever you eat in the breakfast. Get there, because that moment where you're still kind of half in the dream world as you write, for as long as you can extend that, that's the magic. That's the pure, special stuff where later you can revise and do things. So he talks about that at great length. So if this idea interests you, I'd look at what he says about it too, because he has many essays and many longer pieces on it. I do a lot of what you do too. I write with a standard kind of pattern. I write every single day, and I also, something I do with my students as well too, is I'm really conscientious of how my body works, right? And which is basically how I work. I am way smarter and way more creative before noon, like way more. So like if I have real work to do, that's when I do that work. There's different levels of commitment that you need to put into certain types of writing, revision versus generative stuff, and handling contracts and things, which is the business of writing, but not writing proper, but you have to do it. Like, some things can be pushed in different times, and I find that I'm way more efficient when I put the right things in the right place so that I'm best equipped to handle it at the most efficient kind of way. So I don't know if that's how you also handle as well too, but I really like your creative process there where you try to, latch into that dream state. Do you find that you write a certain kind of thing more during that? Like, is that more poems come out during that kind of thing, or like anything happens?
So I don't distinguish between the genres. I believe in the initial urge to utter. Like, what is the thing? You're trying to get something hot, something that's cooking, something alive on the page. And then those genre decisions come way later down the process. I couldn't start there.
Then talk about revision, because revision is obviously a big part in terms of taking this sort of nebulous stuff with words and to, doing things with it that are palatable to other people in forms that are effective. So how does that work for you?
So I don't distinguish between writing and revision, and they're not different at all. It's all one thing. It's the same act. So I'm not trying to like draft. That sounds terrible to me, like a beer or something. Like, I like to try to, before it gets onto the page, like I should be in alignment. Like I think of those books on acting and actor prepares. I don't know if you know that literature, but like you're ready to go in a way that's very thoughtful and engaged with that, whatever that thing is. And no matter what you're writing, a poem or a book that's gonna sell 1 million copies, like it's connected and you're ready and you do it, and it should be going well from the beginning. And then revision isn't fixing it, it's just, it's growing it.
Could you talk about the process of putting together books? Because you have things that come together, they're not a single thing, like a novel. You have a short story collection, which is a bunch of things that are ostensibly connected at some level. And also, too, you do a lot of poetry. So those are where you're gathering lots of stuff. So can you talk about sort of the thinking behind that and how those things aggregate?
Yes, I can finally say yes. Yes. So I love structure. That's my favorite thing. I'm just super interested in structure, like putting things together. I don't know, it's just endlessly interesting to me. So each book, like this is my most recent book, Field Notes from the Flood Zone, very timely, I think. I conceive of each book as a project. So I don't write poems just as little individual children that are just sent off to orphanages somewhere. It's like they're a family from the beginning. They're always going to be together, so it's one big poem. I think all of it is one big project. So order, structure, moving the reader through an experience, I'm just always thinking about that. That's my favorite thing.
So can you talk a little about the process of just promoting these kinds of books? You know, what kind of things do you do specifically, and what kind of things do you tell your students to do? One of the things she does as well, too, she's the director of the undergraduate creative writing program, which is very, very big up at USF in Tampa, and also directs the MFA program. So those are the graduate students, who also many of them teach the undergraduates as well, too. So you have different levels of, you know, advice and experiences, and also what the students are doing, too. So what kind of things do you tell them to do? What kind of things do you do yourself in terms of getting your work out there and promoting your work?
So a few of my students are publishing a book while they're in the program, not too many, that usually happens after. To promote the book, I try to have a really good relationship with my editor and my publicist. I'm sure you've talked about that a lot, but being just a really good author, responding to everything, filling everything out. I'm aware I did not fill out the paperwork I was supposed to for the Ringling College of Art and Design, but usually I'm really good with paperwork. I'm so sorry, it's unlike me. Just being a really good author, not needy, not demanding, trying to sell books for them, right? Not asking them to do anything I can do myself. So I know you guys talk about that here all the time, professionalism. And then just coming up with meaningful, like just to hawk my wares would really kill my soul, but to come up with meaningful ways to engage with an audience, that's really, really important. I'm a good reader, and I only read aloud poems that are gonna be funny. So it would just kill me to have a poetry reading and people thought they had gone to a poetry reading. That would kill me. So I'm trying to make it enjoyable. I work for the audience. This book, Ryan, I don't know if you know this, but Field Notes from the Flood Zone, like I wrote it, you can see how they are on the page. I keep a daily observation diary, it's field notes. So I just write what I see and hear and observe every day. So this all just came from my daily diary, but I never thought of it as poetry. I thought of it as like micro memoir or something. Again, I'm not interested in the names or the labels, but it was like a thing I was doing. But when it was bought by BOA, a really great poetry publisher, they said, these are really nice poems. I'm like, definitely, these poems, 100%, total poems, had that in mind the whole time. So making a good marriage with the marketplace.
So for those of you in my Introduction to the Profession of Creative Writing class, and you do daily journaling about sensory descriptions and details, maybe you're writing your own field notes and micro memoir as well, too.
You can sell those.
You can.
Yeah, that's really great. They're doing that.
So I'm curious, there's so many things I actually want to know. Talk to me about how the industry of writing has changed over the years that you've been involved in it. What are some of the larger movements and changes that you've noticed?
Oh, sure, the death of print and everything's online. That would be the most significant one. But there's also been, and I was talking to Tyler about this earlier, there's always a back energy, right? So then the zines and all of these really cool sort of print-based anarchy things that were happening in the 80s come back again. So that adds some heat to that movement. I don't know how it's changed. I mean, it's competitive, but wasn't it always?
Yes. That's a lot.
Yeah. How have you seen it change?
Well, one of the things I think is that we acknowledge the study of story is useful in other areas in which story is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our school is predicated on this. At the heart of every major we have here is story, and you all understand that. So we might be talking about short fiction here, or we might categorize it as essays, but we're talking about the same things that make your your GA, your CA, your projects, the same thing there. It fuels those things. It's story. Story is the most powerful way to communicate anything. And you're all becoming master communicators in your own areas. It's just how you deliver story, right? And I think there's an acknowledgement that that's a worthy pursuit. It's not all just people trying to write the next great American novel and this super serious kind of stuff. But you can do that too. There's still a place for that.
Absolutely.
But, you don't have to do that. I like the idea that when you do events, you try to have fun or let them have fun too. It's the same strategy I take too. I don't read my super serious poems, nor do I do the poet voice if I do that. I pick the ones that are going to read well on the page and have some emotional impact, but a lot of levity as well too, because, life is full of other kinds of stuff and we all need a little more humor and joy in it, right? Yeah. So let's talk about the book that you're perhaps most well known for, which actually arguably might be the textbook. But you wrote a book about face blindness. So this is something that you came to understand better later in life, right? And you took this life experience that is a challenge and you turned it into an incredibly successful nonfiction book. Do you want to talk about the process of that and like what happened as a result of it, as well as maybe some of the challenges of doing such a thing, which seems difficult to me, like really difficult to be able to see it at that level and communicate it for others. So I'm really interested.
So I was working on a book about my family. I didn't know about face blindness. I'd never heard of it. Have you heard of it? I'd never heard of it. So I'm in a bookstore in Grand Rapids, Michigan on a Sunday afternoon, and I'm just reading a psychology textbook because I was always looking for the answer, like a solution. And I stumble across this concept, face recognition. And I don't know if you've had this moment, but there's these moments in life sometimes where the heavens open up and light comes down and organ music plays and angels sing. It's like this moment and your life will never be the same again. I knew in that instant, if face recognition was a thing, that was the one thing I couldn't do. I was not mentally ill. That was interesting. And then the second thing I knew was I was going to write a book about it and it was going to sell. And it did. And so putting it together, I studied mystery novel writing. I just read a whole bunch of books on mystery novels, did a lot of reading about story structure from screenwriting, and I just figured out how to do it as a mystery. Like the mystery is like, what does she have? And she discovers it. And so it's super fun to do it. And then I wove in that childhood memoir that I'd been working on in alternating chapters, which worked well for this project. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And the coolest part of all was the joinery, like between those two storylines, those 2 chapters. I'm so proud of that. And I was on Good Morning America and the Today Show, and I don't recognize George Stephanopoulos or any of these people. So I have no nerves because it's like, I thought it was a sound guy. It was a super fun ride. And then the TV shows would come to my little town in the Midwest and they'd be like, okay, so can you can you not recognize people right now? And I'm like, dude, it's always happening. I can't perform it. So then they want to go downtown where I'm going to run into people I know. But in the Midwest, are any of y'all from the Midwest? Like when there's cameras around, what do people do? Dive into stores so as to not be on camera, like the streets emptied out. So it was really, really fun. And then it enabled me to do the only thing I can do with this disability, which is just tell everybody about it and ask for help. And you know what? Everybody has stepped in. Everybody helped me. In that little town, after I came out as face blind, I sent an email to the whole community like, this is the thing, I need your help, please tell me how you are. I'd be walking across campus and people would say, hi, Heather! You know how with disability enters the room, people just talk louder. Hello, Heather! And it's like, okay, I know who I am. It's you I need help with. And I was in this little support group online and I was complaining, like, it's so difficult. And this woman, Nancy, said, Heather, privately to me, it took you 35 years to figure this out. Why don't you give people a few more chances to understand it? And I'm like, note to self, like, I'm gonna do that. And so I see this disability as my great teacher. It's changed my life, just how to live with it, how to work with students who have issues. Most of us do have something or 10 things. And I don't know, it's been like my Buddhist teacher, how to live with chaos, how to live with uncertainty, how to just be more real and stop pretending I know something when I don't, which is a side effect of being a professor. You can sometimes think you know a lot. When I started telling my students on the first day, I need your help, I have this thing, my teaching evaluations went up. Everybody has helped me, except one guy So it's really helpful in the dating world to have a thing and then disclose it and see how people respond, right? So I'm telling him, you know, I have this thing, I'm not gonna recognize you. And he's like, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I'm like, okay, yeah, we're done. So it's like, you're telling me you're not. So it saves you like 6-8 months.
Let's talk about what happened as a result of that book, and that's that you started to develop speaking opportunities, right? You want to talk a little bit about how writers often have a second career by talking about their writing and not just writing?
Yes, I got a 6-figure advance for the book, but the money I made from the book was from speaking. I just gave a talk at NASA, and because of COVID, we can't get the tour, but as soon as I have 2 free tickets for a NASA tour. So being invited to speak at med schools and conferences, conventions, to speak to scientists, because even doctors haven't heard of the condition, and even neurology students who study it don't get what it is. It's hard to explain. So my friend calls me the face of face blindness. So giving talks about it always felt really inspiring to me, like I'm helping other people who don't know. Whenever I would give a reading from the book, one person always comes up to me and says, I have it, or my husband has it. I think he really doesn't know what's happening.
What do you tell them when they say that?
Faceblindness.org.
Has all the information we need?
Yeah, a lot of people think they have it, and I don't think they do. And then there's an online test you can take, but it's not a visual disorder, it's a perception, it's a memory issue. So the visual testing isn't exactly the right diagnosis. So, yeah.
Okay. What was the coolest thing you got to do? I know the NASA was super cool, but you did a lot of the shows. What was the coolest thing that happened as a result of that, the most interesting opportunity? There were a lot.
Yeah. I am a shy, introverted person, contrary to all appearances. Like, the coolest thing is just for me being with my students. One of my students, after I'm on all these shows, came up to me after class and he said, Dr. Sellers, there's a book on your thing, that thing you have, and he hands me my book. I'm like, thank you, Chad, just thank you. Like, my picture's on the back. Maybe he has the condition, we don't know.
I'm going to read that right away, Chad. Oh, that's funny. Nice. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening for some of your students right now as well. What kind of things are they working on these days, and what kind of challenges are they encountering, and how do you help them overcome them? Because I'm going to guess some of those things are some of the things that we also experience too.
Sure. So I don't know if this is useful or not, but this is my perspective, so I'll just share it. You take what's useful and leave the rest in the Goldstein Library, as I'm sure you do on a regular basis. So the thing is focus, is picking a project. So my students, they're too interesting, and they've got their fingers in a lot of different pots. They're starting a lot of projects, but committing to one thing, which I know is hard to do early, but I think picking 1 or 2 things that you're going to be known for, and maybe the spin-off projects are related to that. My students dig a lot of shallow wells, and they need to be digging one deep one. But I don't know if that's kind of a buzzkill thing to say.
I don't think so, as long as we're talking about digging those wells. You know what I mean? I think the writers that really run into problems are the ones that actually don't write. They just talk about writing.
Right.
And like the types of things you're talking about, to follow the metaphor, they're actually doing the digging, right? They're doing the thing. And so at any level, I think it's good. But as we know here with creative writing as a major, long form is really where the future is. It's where the money is. That's why we spend a year on a capstone project working on a book length something. It's those deep wells. That's where the future is. Whether it's about you and your own experiences, or whether it's about the imagination that you have, or some combination between the two. That's the practice, that's the thing. And that's what your master's students are working on, of course, and the undergrads are working towards that.
Sure, yeah. It's hard when you're an undergrad because you're still like figuring out the whole, what's possible. So for my graduate students especially, we have a 3-year MFA program, so you have 3 years to write a book. And you know, they just get interested in a lot of interesting things.
So there's a lot of people making the nonverbals that say, I have questions. So I'm going to ask, Sylvia, do you want to help us out here? And grab one of the mics off there, just flip either of them on, and if we end up needing both, we'll use both. And let's take some questions from the audience.
Thanks, Ryan.
For Heather here. We're going to start right in the front here with Logan.
Hello, thank you for coming out here. I read that you teach nonfiction writing, among many other things. That's not something I've tried a lot of. Is there anything that you'd recommend I do as like just a project to start and to get my feet in the water to test it? Because it's something that interests me. I want to travel write and do stuff like that, but I haven't taken the time to do it.
Great question. So I would talk to your professors and get a reading list of essays in publications that are open to new writers. There are many, and get a market in mind, and then read good people who are publishing in that market and start practicing after you do a deep read.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do you have an example yourself did you read any yourself in terms of writing your own face blindness book that you read in terms of model and mentor texts?
Absolutely.
What were some of the ones that really worked for you and helped you write that book?
I can tell you what didn't help me.
Sure.
Was books like The Glass Castle. You know, a lot of moms really love that book. Like the misery memoir, like The Bad Childhood. Like I did not want that story. I wanted the middle, and I always found that missing. Like they had a terrible childhood, and now they're blah blah, and it just drives me insane. Like I don't need to know any of that. What I want to know is how did you get there? So I read a lot of like older authors, less kind of newer authors, but just I read dozens and dozens and dozens of memoirs. Dozens. And novels too, because novels you got to have a plot. Like I wanted structure. I don't like, they call it like the lyric mode, and I'm thinking you don't have a story, do you, honey?
It's a good way to think. I really like how you talked about how you read mystery novels and you thought about that, because most people would go the other route. It's like, this is my life story, this is how it happened, and that's how I'm going to explain it to you. It's like, no, let's figure out how to shape it. We talk about the distinction a lot between just straight up flat story
Right.
and plot, which is deliberately manipulating for desired effects, and that's thinking about it.
Withholding information. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's fantastic, super helpful. Thank you. I couldn't have staged that one better myself. What other questions did we have? There's a bunch of people kind of give me the look in the audience there. This way in the back over yonder, I think it's Izzy. I can't quite tell. It's me.
So cute.
Thank you. So I read a few of your poems, and they managed to create such a vivid scene. And then when I went on your website, that was when I learned that you had face blindness. And so I was wondering, even with the face blindness, what details do you focus on to create such vivid scenes? Because I realized you didn't use like physical descriptions, and yet I could still picture everything that you were saying.
Thank you for those kind words about my work. So I don't know if having a disability like this makes me more paying attention. I think writers are just always the person in the back of the room paying attention. I think that's what we do. So I don't know that there's that visual connection. I'll just quick explain face blindness. So when you see a face, if you have the special face processor that most humans do, it comes in through your eyes, very cheap equipment. That line did not go well when I was speaking to the Ophthalmology Association of Michigan. But the eyes are just easy. It's just like a simple thing. So the image goes in through the eyes and it goes into your brain, and you've got a little guy in your brain and a filing cabinet. He opens a drawer, sifts through, finds the match. It's Izzy. You say, hey, I forgot your name, but I know who you are. So that's how it works for you. I've got the eyes, I've got the filing cabinet, I've got the little guy. We saw this on MRIs at Harvard and MIT. But when my guy, instead of going to the filing cabinet, he just throws the image out the window every single time, just right out the window. I can't store any image of the human face even for a nanosecond. So each time I see it, it's new. I don't know if I see what you see. I have no idea. I can't imagine getting more information than I'm already getting from the world. It's a lot. But I just can't remember a face ever. So it's just like you with golden retrievers. You know it's yours because it's like in your house or it's running towards you. That's how I know, okay, this is my boyfriend, you know, he's home. I'm going with it, right? Like most of the data is lining up. It's scary to have it because it doesn't always work. So it's not visual. So every other object I see normally, we think. We don't really know, but that's why they study face blind people, is because that's the window into the black box. Perception, face recognition is just so interesting because of the government. We can move into our anarchy conversation here. You know, the face recognition, it's all, you know, I don't even need to go into this. I'm in Sarasota. So when you see a pencil, you're doing regular object processing. You know what a pencil is, it's yellow, it's your pencil, it's got all your little tooth marks in it. You're like, that's my favorite one. So I sort the same way you do with all objects faces. That's how that works. So I appreciate your comments. I don't know. The last book is about place, not people. So there's a lot of nature descriptions in it. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I'll get you in 1 second, Oscar, in a second, but I just want to follow up with that. So how do you handle when you write scenes about characters, right? With understanding that you've seen things differently and you want to kind of communicate. It seems like it would be especially challenging. I mean, it's all challenging to do. In fact, I'm just kind of curious. How do you navigate that then when you write scenes with, characters?
The same way you do. Same way you do. Like we've all been reading and viewing for so long. We've got our tropes. We have our moves. I don't think technically it's any different. Emotion, some people can't read emotion on a face, but I read it within I'm using the word normal very loosely here, but I read within the normal range. So I know you're pissed off at me. I just don't know who you are.
All right. Oscar had a question right in front.
Hi. So can you remember things like hair and eye color and like facts like that, or is it just all empty space?
It's a great question, Oscar. So hair, yes. Anything in the face plane, no.
Okay.
No eyebrows, no facial hair. Like my boyfriend has a beard, doesn't have a beard. I cannot even tell you if you gave me $1,000. I have no idea. I can't remember anything in the face. But the ears, I'm good with ears. And if you look at the person sitting next to you, look at their ear and then look away. Can you conjure an image of that ear? No, you cannot. That's me in faces.
Okay.
Right up the end of the front, we have multiple hands.
It's a good row.
Yeah, it's a good row. Good row.
Hi.
Hi.
Something you've written about before is learning to be kinder to yourself. I found that the process of learning to be kinder to myself involves learning more specific words for the things that I'm struggling with. For instance, I used to think of myself as maybe lazy or unmotivated, and then it kind of changed my world to learn the phrase executive dysfunction. I was wondering if you could speak on the power of learning words specific to your experience and how that can improve your mental health.
I really identify with every syllable of that comment. Just having the name, face recognition, face blindness, just lifted all of that effort of feeling so bad that I didn't know people, pretending I did, just all of these horrible things and all of that self-talk that's so destructive. But it makes you kinder to other people too, right? When they're horrible assholes, you're like, oh yeah, they have a thing. So it's good.
So I want to follow up with something here, and then we'll get to Guy in 1 second here. You're talking a lot about how you relate to other people and how you're sort of modeling this kind of behavior. We talk a lot here about literary citizenship. And I'm not prepped her on this. I have no idea what she's going to say on some of these things. What is literary citizenship to you, and what do you think about that?
So, I don't know. I hear that a lot.
I do too.
But it's not a place, or is it?
I don't know. Is it to you?
I don't know. Here's what I worry about. And I know what you're talking about, Ryan. I'm not trying to be oppositional defiant. I'm not. But I just worry, does that mean that you have to go to a whole bunch of horrible poetry readings? There are some good ones. Because you're a good citizen? Does it mean more obligation and you're not getting your work done? What does it mean?
What should it mean?
I don't know. Literary citizenship. I don't know. I hear it a lot. What is it to you?
To me, I think it's being a meaningful part of a community of creatives who have a shared affinity of story.
Okay, that I like. So putting out a literary magazine, giving people publishing opportunities, editing that work, nurturing younger writers, I'm on board with that.
I believe you give. And some people say you give to get, right? But I don't care about the get too much. I do a lot of things because I think it's important to give. It's why I'm a teacher.
I like that. Creating the anthologies.
Oh God, yeah, it is.
Labor of love.
Thankless task. There's
But-
no money in that, but it's good to do.
It's
fun.
good to you
I meet people like this.
and creating a record, documenting if that's literary citizenship, I'm for it.
I think that's a type, yeah. I think there's more types. I think it's important to think about this, be a meaningful member of a community.
I like it.
In whatever way you find meaning in it. So I don't think it's as much about obligation, other than just thinking creatively about your place in it and how you can fit in and how you can make a contribution that matters. In the same way you think about your lives in general. How can you make a contribution that matters as a person?
That's good. You've convinced me.
Oh, there you go. One for me. Guy.
So Heather, I understand you are a leader at the undergraduate program and the master's program at USF. I also saw on your website, you are a certified online instructor. Segue into, we all know the experience we've had over the last 2 years and how we've had to accommodate by having a big shift to online and remote learning. Now that we seem to be, and I am very tempered with the use of this word, but transitioning back to something kind of like normalcy, I'm wondering from your perspective as a program leader, do you see over the next decade that this remote learning and online learning experiences will continue to expand, or is there a contraction happening now as we go back to something like normal?
Great question. We'll never go back. Online is here to stay. I was teaching online long before the pandemic. I love online teaching. I'm really good at it. And there's one thing that happens in that space for me. Everybody has their name on there. So it's the only time I walk into a classroom, and it's transformational. At first I didn't know, why do I love this so much? Like, I'm a people person, like a relational sit in a circle person. Why do I like this so much? It's because it's the only time I always know who everybody is in the room. So I love it. I've developed some really great courses that get super good reviews. There's bad online, there's great online education. But for students in Sarasota to be able to take creative writing classes in Tampa when they don't offer them at USF Sarasota, that access, people with disabilities, people with families or complicated lives, we've now pretty much included everybody, just that there could be that access that's so important to me. So I think it's fantastic to have both.
Could you say a couple words about, because you're teaching right now online as well, we talked about this earlier at dinner tonight. What are some of the things you do that really make those online courses work really well?
Synchronous, great lecture, interaction, it's all set up, it moves fast. It's just like you would be in class, but better. And the students in my classes at USF give better feedback because you're not sitting next to them, right? You don't have to like feel their anxious energy. They can just say, dude, she's not gonna take this piece because you don't have a metaphor. So they're more honest and more direct. I think it's a safer space.
Interesting, yeah. Safe space is really important to be able to have those conversations. There are other people giving me the signs. Oh man, good Lord, it's that row now. There's tons of people. Sylvia, I'll let you pick. You have many hands.
They can just pass it down the line.
Okay. I have a multi-part question because I'm greedy. Do you have any advice for writers of all like levels on submitting work and also working with an editor?
So I'm sure you guys have heard this a ton you just have to read the magazines, right? You have to read the venues. You have to just know it really, really well. And then working with an editor, if you have any kind of people-pleasing issues, this is your game. Like, it's your time now. Like, just trying to work really, really well, take as much feedback as you can, and only push back when you really have to after consultation with your mentor. I don't just give it all over, but it's when they buy your book, they own it. So they can change the title, they pick the cover. You give up a lot of creative control in many cases, at least with a big house in New York. With a small press, I think it's more of a collaboration. So I think just like you are, like your mom maybe told you, just like try to be easy to get along with by not being annoying. And all this stuff you guys talk about all the time. Meet your deadline.
Yeah, the rules of creative writing here, the follow directions, produce clean copy, hit deadlines. That'll serve you well in these.
That's what I would say, yeah. Does that answer your question?
I was wanting to say, like, when you disagree maybe with their advice, or if you have a different vision, but maybe going with it is the best advice.
I guess, so sorry. I've had really great editors. I have a really great agent. She was Stephen King's agent. My editor is just one of the top editors in New York. And so she knows more than I do about books. Like, I read a lot, but she sells a lot. So I'm like, Becky, we're going to do it your way. There were like two things that I pushed back on. So I think if you trust the person and it's a really intimate relationship, then you're going to do it. But I think I've been super lucky. I don't know. What would your advice be?
Oh, I don't have any. That's why I was asking you. No, I would agree with that. And just making sure the relationship is right.
Yeah, if it's not, that's a whole different problem.
I would just say pick your battles,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're gonna fight over every single thing, you're gonna be a difficult person to work with.
Mhm.
And this industry is too small to be having a reputation of being a difficult person to work with. Even if you're right about a lot of those battles, you have to kind of, it's a creative collaboration. And we understand that at this school maybe more than most, because a lot of the industries you're in have a lot of people involved, like film. And it's not just you, there's a whole bunch of people, right? Animation of any type, all these things. There's a ton, game making, there's a ton of people. And you have to leave room for other people who are really talented and smart, and possibly smarter than you about certain things. Give them a voice, and sometimes they're righter than you are. Right? Maybe sometimes they're not too, but it's still good, it's just different. That's okay too. So, that's my quick advice.
I agree.
All right, it's going right down the road there.
Yeah, you mentioned when you made your book about like the craft of writing, you made that list of, or going through what works. Now with all your experience, do you still dissect and try to learn new things about the craft? And if so, what's the most recent thing you found where you were, oh, that works in stories?
Really great, super hard question. So yeah, every day I try to learn something new about craft. The last thing I learned yesterday was just a little more finessing on scenes and sequels, right? We all do scene, 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 but what's the sequel? Like the next moment, that quieter moment of decision, reflection, like just getting really granular on those moves. How am I gonna do that? How am I gonna deploy that? And then practicing it. Does that answer that part? So I'm just reading about craft all the time. I'm never not reading interviews with authors who are great and studying craft books. It's my Bible. But there was another part to your question, I think.
No, it was about what the most recent
Thing that
was.
I learned, yeah, scenes and sequels.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you, because you said you don't really like put a genre right away. However, I was very, my attention really piqued with like you having a collection of like poems, but it's also a memoir, and just description of everything, and then the cover, I thought it was like great. So I don't know how was the experience of finding this two, I guess like forms of writing that just come together as a like hybrid form, because it's not something like common to see.
Yeah, I love that. I would like all my work to be seen as hybrid work, right? That it doesn't fit into those categories, so that they're poems, but they all have a narrative and field notes from the flood zone. It is a memoir. They are poem-like things, but they're stories, and it's a whole book. And it's all part of my body of work. Does that sound pretentious? But it all is connected. It all relates. I dug one hole, Florida, and you hit water pretty quick. So I've been swimming there ever since.
Could you talk a little bit more about that connection to Florida? Because you're from Orlando, right? And you went to school at, Florida, then went away for 18 years to Michigan, then came back. So Florida is through and through a big part of who and what you are. And you even said earlier, I love Florida. Could you talk a little bit more about how it informs your work and maybe a little bit of fuels you creatively?
Yeah, I mean, Florida, it's my subject matter. God put me here to just like document. Honey, just start documenting. So I just write everything down, right? It's such a complicated and interesting place. I can't imagine living anywhere else. I've spent a lot of time in New York and Texas and Michigan, and I'm always called back here. I think it's a really important place to be writing right now, given some of the things we're facing. So I never really left. It's always been my subject matter.
What other questions do we have? There's a hand over there. Yep, thank you.
Hi, I'm Heidi.
Hey.
Actually, building on the topic of Florida, it's a place that inspires you a lot, which I really admire. I spent a lot of time here. And it's also a place that really reflects a lot of environmental concerns or natural disasters. And how does that kind of impact your creative process and inspiration?
Yeah, thanks. Great question, great observation. So it does feel like Florida's kind of like boldface italicized for the world because it's so vulnerable. And so those storms and the things that happen here politically have always worked for me as metaphors for what happens in the American family. So those two things are just so potent for me and so rich. And I don't know that I'm ever going to have another subject matter.
Terrific. We have time for a few more questions. What are some of the other things that we want to hear from Heather about? Thanks.
So your life clearly has like a really big impact on your work, and I was wondering, how do you decide which sort of like scenes that you're taking from your life? How do you decide which ones of those build into these larger stories? Because reading through your work, you do such a good job of building these tiny, poignant moments into larger, important messages. And I was really curious how you kind of decide how to do that.
It's so kind. Like I get overwhelmed by the kind praise. I can't think. But you know how when you refinish a dresser, like I've never done that before, but just imagine like you revarnish it and you're rubbing your hand over the top of it to see if it's smooth and there'll be that little snag. Your finger will hit that little snag. I feel like it's that. Does it work that way for you? Like the moments pick you? And then a lot of it is structural assembly. I really want to tell you the story about Sherry, my friend, seeing the plastic bag in the pond, but it wasn't. It was a deer butt and the alligator was circling it. But I just like that story. And I like how she tells it. It has nothing to do with the narrative. I can't put it in. So I guess it's a kill your darlings kind of thing. You don't really get to pick. The story has its demand. You have to feed that beast. So I write a lot. I'm very, very generous. So I give myself a big canvas to choose from. And then I'm picking those moments that are going to set up and build the other moments. Does that answer it? Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit of discipline and an enormous amount of time.
Great. As we're getting set up here, let me ask another question though. In the wide range of things that you do, right, you've also published a children's picture book. You want to talk a little bit about how that happened and how it was different or similar to some of the other kinds of writing that you've done and shared with the world?
It is the hardest, it's the hardest discipline. 24 pages, story beat on every page, nowhere to hide. Like it's so hard. I thought it would be so easy because it's like a kid. It was so hard. I was really humbled. We were speaking about this. That community, the children's book people are so nice and so supportive and so patient and kind. It's a little room in the mansion of creative writing that's got like cookies and juice and it's so friendly, and then it's the only audience where they say read it again, read it again, read it again. Like no, you'll never hear that. So I love that children's book world. Super hard to get into though, really, really difficult to break into.
Hello.
Hi.
So you talked a lot about sort of how your community really helped and influenced your work, but you also mentioned sort of how Florida is like your home base and you've had to go to like New York and Texas. How do you go about building a community in all these new places, and how does that influence your work? Because I think a lot of us, I want to be a story artist and go into the animation industry, so the push is always to go to California, which is a completely new place for me. How do you go about building a new community in these new places?
Oh, that's such a good question. So, I mean, that world is so specific, and I don't know how much you can be online and do that job. That sounds really hard. But I know that to find community, you find the people who love what you love. So I'm always finding, so we're back to literary citizenship, the group of writers who are kind writers and supportive writers. So I usually have writing partners that I'm with, like moving in the pack. And then for me, my community is education, is teaching, is my students. So I always have that home base to come back to. California. Good luck. I think it's going to go great. I think you're going to do it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. We have time for a couple more questions. It seems like there's one over yonder.
Hello. I really appreciated how you talked about working with your students. And my question is someone that I'm not preliminary into writing and into that, but in the creative industry in general, I would like to ask, what would you say is the hardest part of teaching creativity, and how can we writers, but also not writers, in the creative industry can sustain creativity and produce work that feels personal yet unique?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you kind of started answering what I was going to say. It's like, stay in touch with the personal and unique, stay in touch with your urge to create. Like, don't try to do it how everybody's telling you to do it. Like, stay weird, embrace your eccentricity, like stay with that thing that is just only you. And then the other thing I teach is you got to get out of your head. You cannot do this work with your head. You got to learn all of the technique and craft. And then you have to like do a backflip off the planet, forget about all of that, and go do what you do. It's like training as an athlete or a musician, right? You like skill build, skill build, skill build. And when you're out in the field, you just go do you. Does that make any sense? Yeah. Stay out of your head. It's not your friend.
It's great advice. So while Sylvia's finding if there's any last questions here, let me ask you too, in your morning writing sessions, how long do those typically last? How long can you capture the tail end of those dreams and catch that flow?
Yeah, it's 2 to 4 hours depending on the teaching day, but it's 2 to 4 hours. And I think creativity experts have shown us that it takes about 30 minutes to get into flow, and then you got to repeat those cycles. So I use the Pomodoro method. Y'all do that, 25-minute timers. Yeah, it just really works for me. 4 hours is best.
Talk about that method. Some of them don't know that, I'm sure.
Would you like to explain it?
The Pomodoro, in Italian, it means tomato. And so if you go online just looking up like Pomodoro, Focus, IO, anything like that, you'll find this little timer where you can set slots like writing, gaming, I don't know, like drawing. You can set how many slices you want to put into that tomato timer so that every single day you know exactly how long you're going to be spending on each and everything. So you're really able to manage time so much better. It's amazing. I literally have a slot for this, like for 50 minutes, so they can be factored precisely into my schedule. It's really great. I would definitely recommend it.
So for those of you who struggle with time management or you feel like you don't get enough done, this is a way to kind of at least meet your minimum thresholds or kind of just get control over what sometimes feels like a really messy kind of day-to-day existence where you're always maybe reacting to stuff. This is a way to get proactive about the things that matter and account for it with regularity.
You're setting an intention the night before, so I set it all up the night before. So I know what I'm going to do with my slices, because you can't just sit there like, I'll create now. And that's just like a demon attraction. You're just never, that's just a horrible place to be. So I have a plan, which I can always deviate from, but I'm pretty intentional just because I have a demanding full-time job. So I don't have a lot of wiggle room, to smoke cigarettes and listen to records. So, although that's important too.
Absolutely right. We got a question right over here.
So there's lots of creative writing advice books out there. So what in particular, if anything, would be like your one takeaway from your book that you would like give to everybody here? Like maybe think like a chapter or something.
You're not going to like it.
Oh no.
Write by hand. Just try it once in a while.
What's it going to do for you?
It's going to slow you down. This lets you go too fast and lets you erase too fast. So just slow down. Just try it. Just try it. Without a fancy pen, just with your regular pen. See what happens.
Great. We're running up against the end here, and I have 2 questions if we were there. So what are you working on next? What's your current project right now?
So with all due respect, Ryan, for me to talk about it before, it's not time, it messes, I have to keep it really quiet.
Sure.
But I'm always writing nonfiction and poem-like, uncategorizable things.
So you write a lot of essays. You were talking about this earlier. You love essays. You've had essays in the New Yorker,
I love
Best
essays.
American Essay Collections. What do you like about the essay as a form?
So what do I like about the essay as a form? I guess that you can just go find out interesting things, right? And in fiction, you have to build a world and do all this stuff for the reader, like you really work for them. But in an essay, you can follow this crumb that's just interesting and keep unfolding it. I guess I like the intellectual process of the essay.
What's your favorite essay that you've written and published?
My favorite essay, the last one I wrote, always. Like I always think that it's not only the best essay ever written, I always think it's the greatest contribution to American letters today. I always think that. It's about my grandmother called Greenie. She just had one leg, and I forgot about how interesting this all was. I can't even remember what prompted me. It's out looking for a home, and when it gets published, it won't be my favorite anymore.
Right. Did you have a new one?
Oh, a new one, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's the last question I've got for you.
Okay.
What's the best bit of writing advice you ever got, and what did it mean to you?
The best writing advice I ever got. I think it's that thing we've been talking about all night.
Yep.
It's just do the work. No excuses. Show up every day. You're never going to really want to do it. Just do the work. It's that ethic and just doing it. And it meant to me, yay, you're not psycho because you can't leave the house and you do all this work all the time and write all these books and don't go to parties. Like, yay, you. That's what it meant to me. It affirmed like my nature.
Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to thank Heather for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Great questions. Y'all are amazing. I can just tell how sparkly your careers are going to be. I'm honored to have met you, and it was a privilege to be here. Thank you for having me.